18th of January this year, rural schools are getting a very raw deal when it comes to funding when compared with those in towns and cities. And yet Lynn Featherstone, your MP in Hornsey and Wood Green, says on March the 27th this year, this is our opportunity to do something about the government's unfair funding of Haringey schools. Well, which is it?
Well, as you know, and as Lynn would be able to tell you, that parts of London have very, very stark differences of poverty and affluence, cheek by jowl. It's very, very different to other parts of the country. What we're saying is that the government's approach to school funding is on an area-based approach. It's not actually targeting the children who need the help most. This is something, by the way, that I came across about 9 years ago when I first actually co-authored a book on this, looking at how they help children who need most help in schools like Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden. And what I learnt from looking at it way back then is that if you give more one-to-one tuition, more Saturday morning catch-up classes, smaller class sizes, to those schools, especially those schools catering for children who maybe aren't getting the support they need with their homework, at home and so on, it has a fantastic effect on improving the educational performance of all children.
Nobody denies there are many ways of improving the performance of children all over the country. My point is merely that your MPs are saying different things in different parts of the country.
Look, without knowing the funding formula of individual schools in Haringey, you
well,
simply
is
can't
it a
make
rural problem or an urban problem?
It's a national problem. The national problem is that children who need the most help, the most one-to-one tuition...
But apparently not in Hackney.
What I'm saying is that there are some schools in East London, I've been very open about this, and we've all been very open about this, have received a disproportionate amount of extra help from this government. And what we're saying under our policy, that is help we would give to all children. I don't think where you are poor, where you are born, should determine the circumstances of your birth. And if you don't think that's a problem, in my city of Sheffield, a child born today in the poorest neighbourhood in Sheffield, today in 2010, is on average going to die 14 years before a child born just up the road in the more affluent neighbourhood of Sheffield. And that gap, that shameful gap of inequality, has not closed under Labour. That is unfair. That is what our tax policies and our school policies and other policies would help to try and solve.
Can we sweep up very quickly one or two other policy areas? Is it, in your judgment, right to have another vote on hunting with dogs? And if so, how would you vote?
No, I don't think we should have another vote.
You don't think so?
The matter is settled.
OK, fine. If it did happen, how would you vote?
I would not vote to repeal the ban.
All those promises of your last election manifesto, replacing council tax with a local income tax, free care for the elderly, abolition of the student tuition fees and so on, they're all now dead, are they?
No, they're not. The tuition fees, all we've said is we've elongated the timetable by which we think they can be abolished, so we've retained, quite rightly, I think, the wish to
Because it can't be afforded now.
Because money is tight, so there's some things you can't do. There are other things, like our policies on childcare, where when resources allow, we want to see the childcare support given to couples reduced from when a child is 3 down to 18 months. But we're being very open that right now that's not something we could do.
But the local income tax would presumably be revenue neutral, as it's called, wouldn't it?
Well, what we're doing with the local income tax, we think that the principle still remains that council tax is unfair. If you're a pensioner in a home, you've got very low income, but you're being hammered with council tax, even though you can't afford it and you've got a very low income. So we think in the long run, there is a case for replacing council tax with a fairer tax based on the ability to pay. But we think that the first thing we should do is invite local authorities, if they want, to volunteer to see whether that would work in practice.
And on the euro, which you wanted us to join, you now admit that was a mistake.
I admit that on the narrow point of interest rates, that if you were just to sort of transplant the interest rates from the Eurozone over the last few years to the British economy, they would have been wrong. They would have been too low. I think it's quite difficult, though, to imagine what the British economy would look like if we had entered the Euro. So it's a slightly academic
argument. But you
argument.
still want a referendum?
I think if we're going to have any proposal of going into the single currency, it's not something I'm advocating now, but if we were to do that, clearly that has to be done on the basis of a referendum.
And can we just clear up something on child benefit? In September last year, you said you wanted to get rid of child benefit for high earners. At the start
no, I didn't say get rid of it. I never said that.
You've never wanted to get rid of it for high earners?
No, I've never said that.
But Vince Cable said in the Chancellor's debate, only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks ago, that he did want to get rid of it.
No, he made quite clear within minutes, I think, of the debate that he misspoke, that what he meant was the child component of the tax credit system. We are not putting child benefit into question. I never have, and he hasn't either. All
right, let's go then to what may be an outcome of this election. Would you serve in a government led by Gordon Brown?
I laugh because it's not a question about whether I'm sort of serving in other governments. If the British people in the ballot box decide that no party, neither the Liberal Democrats nor Labour nor the Conservatives, deserve an outright majority, then clearly, it seems to me, stating the obvious, that politicians will need to speak to each other to give the stable, reasonable, reasoned, sane government that people deserve.
So you're not ruling it out?
Well, I can't rule out what the British people want. The British people have got to tell us. They're the boss, not us. It's not for me to say.
But you're not ruling it out.
I'm not going to rule anything. How can I rule anything out without the bosses first having told us what they want?
So equally, you wouldn't rule out serving in a government led by David Cameron?
It's really not a question about whether it's Brown or Cameron. It's not my personal preferences. By golly, there are enough differences I have with them as it is. It's what the British people want. If the British people don't want any single party to have an outright majority, then what I think you are entitled to ask, quite rightly, is to say, well, what are your priorities? And I've been clear on that. But also, where do you think it is important that politicians should work together? And again, I've gone much further than David Cameron and Gordon Brown in saying that irrespective of the outcome, whether there's a balanced parliament or not, whether we're in opposition or not, I think there's a case for politicians now to work to come together with the Governor of the Bank of England, with the head of the Financial Services Authority, to come clean and be open with the British people about the scale of the structural deficit, because they're not being open with them, so that at least we agree what the enormity of this problem is and how we're going to deal with it over time.
But if someone wants to get rid of Gordon Brown, don't vote for you.
Look, a vote for the Liberal Democrats is not a vote for anybody else. A vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for fairer taxes, smaller class sizes, splitting up the banks and making them lend money to viable British businesses, and cleaning up politics in Westminster, for nothing else. Of course, Labour will say a vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for the Conservatives. Conservatives will say a vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for Labour. It's nonsense. Don't believe a word of it.
Aren't we in all of this, though, slightly playing fantasy politics? If you were asked to form such a government, you would have to have the agreement of your parliamentary party, the agreement of your executive, and then an agreement of all your members. Do you really think the country would hang around waiting for your members to sort out their rail cards?
Well, if you put it like that, no, probably not, Jeremy. But look, I'm totally confident of the fact that if the British people, as I say, said, look, none of you guys deserve an outright majority, then the Liberal Democrats, we would play a responsible role in making sure that people get the kind of government that this country deserves, and crucially, that we would fight for the priorities that I've talked about earlier: fair taxes, better education, a new approach to the economy, and a cleaner politics.
Nick Clegg, thank you. And next week we hope to be talking to David Cameron, and the week after to Gordon Brown. I hope you can join us then, but for now, Nick Clegg, thank you very much.
On the BBC News Channel now, the campaign show. John Sopel is in Westminster with a roundup of all the election events, and as Labour launch their manifesto, he's joined by their deputy leader, Harriet Harman.